Alright, welcome class to this video, and what I'm going to do in this video, the goal of it is to help make what you need to do clearer. Obviously there's only one of me and about 12 of you or so, and it's very difficult for me to get around to everybody to help them with questions. And so I want to make it as clear as possible for you with working through the textbook and then also with your assignments. So what I'm planning on doing from now on is recording a video of me doing it on the computer with you. So I'm going to walk through this chapter with you to help you in doing the assignment, and then of course also with our next assignment as well. So let's take a look. I'm on chapter 5, Css Introduction. Make sure you follow along with your textbook. I'll kind of read through some things and then point out. So this will hopefully clarify what is information and what are actual steps that you need to work on. As usual, it's the beginning of a chapter, so you need to go to not Plus Portals, but actually foundationsofwebdesign.com and download the exercise file. So I've already done that, so I'm going to start the reading here. If you need to pause this video, go download those files and then come back to this. Now after 4 chapters, I'm sure you're sick of just looking at HTML and black and white text in the browser. I don't blame you. Well, that's good, he doesn't blame us. After all, the book does have the words web design in the title. Well, in this chapter you'll learn some of the basics of how to style a website with CSS, so cascading style sheets. We've kind of talked through it throughout. Now we finally get to dive in. The power of CSS. It talks about basically if you want to see CSS in action. There was kind of a competition, so to speak, where they had as many people as possible use the same HTML document but change the CSS part of it. And they came with 213 different designs. So if you want to look at that, you can. Otherwise, I'm going to move to the next page. And I'm looking at landscape. And there's 2 pictures there you can see of what CSS can do for your HTML document. They use the same information, but it looks vastly different. And so this is going to give you a lot. There's kind of the cool pixelated one, and then of course you have another one that has food as their theme. We're going to keep moving along. So I'll flip to the next page here, and then of course he talks about new submissions being accepted. You don't really need to worry about that, but today we're going to be talking about selectors. So we're getting into cascading style sheets, and it says here you can select HTML document or elements, so that's the HTML tag element, and style them with a number of properties. CSS is written rather differently than HTML, but you'll pick it up quickly, which you will. The selector is how you specify the HTML element, so H1, so header 1, paragraph, span, etc. The property identifies the aspect of the element you wish to style. So selector is what part of the HTML element you are changing. The property is the aspect you want to change. So color, border, font family, and of course finally the value is where you indicate exactly how you want the property to display for that selector. So if you want red, you want 20 pixels, left, right, etc. All those different things. And so you can visually see it better here on the page. So property and value together, such as color property and red value, are called a declaration. So you can see 2 of them combined together is basically a declaration. The entire group, a selector like H1 HTML element plus a declaration, makes up a CSS rule. So you can see it here. So selector plus the declaration makes up a CSS rule. The selector, the opening curly brackets, you can see it in the textbook. It's different than HTML. The declaration, property and value, and the closing curly bracket compose the whole CSS rule. And you can see it here on your page in your textbook. So HTML element, that is your selector, so H1, and you can see that there. And then CSS, we see it's a selector, and then declaration is the color, which is the property, that's the aspect you're changing, and value is what is the color you're changing it to, red, and you can see the combined result on my website. So now first step here, it says let's look at a basic example, and it shows here FOWD Chapter 5, so you download the exercise files, and it says 1 selector.html, and it says here it contains that HTML that has an H1 element with the text my website. So I'm going to go to that, So I'm going to click Open File, and I'm going to actually click up here. Now you should be saving your documents to a folder for you. Now on my own personal computer, I have it just in FOWD, and I have that there. I would recommend that you have a folder in Documents with your name, the class on it, that you can save your files to, because that's been a big issue with people in their HTML assignments getting confused is they're not saving it to the right place. So you need to make sure you have a folder that is all your stuff saved. And then of course download your exercise folder. So I have all the different chapters here, but I'm going to open up 5. And then of course it says I'm going to choose 01 selectors. So I'm going to open that up. And of course I'm just going to click no. It's because I was messing around with it earlier. And here we have our coding. So it is right here in the document, body, h1, my website, and then closing tag body. Now it says here the CSS, which is located for now in the head element, so right up here head, right down here head element, is within another HTML element called style. So the CSS part is in head and then also style. So we have to have those two tags. So one of the 4 ways you can apply CSS style to HTML. And then of course it says we'll talk more about the different ways to apply CSS to markup in just a moment. And then it kind of shows you this coding right here in the style tag. And you can see up here, this is an example of how it's laid out, and then you see how it is actually in action. Now the CSS rule above selects the H1 element and modifies its color property from default black you've been seeing to the value of red. The browser shows the result, and you can see it there, and I'll go ahead and do a preview as well on my screen. So browser preview, remember this is the selection. And right here I can see it over here on the side. Now I can have one declaration or I can have multiple, and I'm flipping to the next page. CSS rule sets can also contain multiple declarations, so multiple properties and values, and you can see here it has the color red in one declaration, and then the other declaration says font size 6 EM. So a CSS rule comprises a selector and a declaration block. So when you have more than one declaration, it's called a declaration block. And you'll notice we separate each declaration with a semicolon. And you can see that in the coding right over here. So each declaration. So this one has a colon for in between the property and the value, where this one has a semicolon in between. Now, Semicolon Requirements. The last declaration doesn't require a semicolon, but it's a good habit to use one, just for the reason that you will probably end up adding more to it. So, there's a lot more to this, it says, a lot more, but even now your head might be spinning, which may be the case. Mine certainly was when I was first learning this stuff back in 2002. For some of you, it all may make perfect sense. So, this is to help either one. In order to familiarize you with these concepts, let's add to your CSS. So return to your sample you're just looking at, 01 selector.html. The CSS I gave you is modifying the color property of the selected H1 element, and you can see that. By default, the browser makes all text black. We know that, but this CSS changes its value to red. What else could be modified? Well, you can use the font size property to increase the size of your font, and it shows in here adding it to the text. So I click after my semicolon, push enter, you notice it goes down, and then I can type in font size, colon, and then 6 EM, semicolon, and now I have my file there, or the change. You can do this as well. I save it and notice it makes it a lot bigger for the text. And now I have a declaration block inside of my CSS rule set. So take a look at yours. If you need to throughout, pause the video if I'm going too fast for you. Finish the step and then start playing it again. So if that's a problem, if you can keep up, great. If not, pause. Now, expanded declarations it talks about. While you can write your CSS rule set in a compact style where one declaration appears right after the other, it can get a little tough to distinguish each declaration when there are quite a few in the same selector. To begin with, write CSS rule sets in expanded format, where each declaration is on a separate line making it easier to read. So you can already see I have that here in the text. Now I've gone through the structure, it reads here on the next page, of CSS in painstaking detail because it's extremely important that you understand how CSS is written. Cascading style sheets is a set of rules containing selectors and declarations that allow you to control how your site looks so you're not stuck with the default settings that your browsers employ. Now adding CSS to HTML. Now remember that I said that there were multiple ways to apply CSS style to a document. There are 4 methods that he's talked about in the book. Embedding CSS in the head of an HTML document, and then there's inline CSS inserted directly into the opening tag of an HTML document, and then a separate CSS document linked to an HTML document, and a separate CSS document imported into an HTML document. Now I know that's a lot, and we're going to go through the different lists. So embedding CSS. I've already shown you one method, embedding CSS into your HTML document inside the style element, which must be contained within the head element. And you can see that already we have style code is in the head element. Now, the benefits of embedded CSS. This can be useful for quick testing of rules or changes to a single page. Downside of embedded CSS. It has to be loaded every time the HTML document is loaded and could slow down the page. Also, embedded rules cannot be applied to multiple HTML documents, limiting their reusability and efficiency. Additionally, it is desirable to separate content HTML from design CSS to keep documents lightweight and easy to manage. So that's embedded CSS. Inline CSS are applied directly to the opening HTML element tag via a style attribute. And so you can see HI and then style, color red, my website, H1. Benefits of inline CSS. Inline CSS is useful for testing a single, simple style and for rigid content management systems that don't allow you to add your own style sheet. But that's for a different book. Downside of inline CSS. Inline CSS is difficult to change if you have to hunt through lots of HTML to find all the inline CSS styles in your HTML documents. It adds to the HTML document size and combines content with design, which are best separated. Seriously, try to avoid this method. So apparently inline CSS is not a good one. And then there's a link to an external CSS document. It's a good idea to put your CSS rules into their own document, separating presentation styles from content. HTML is your content, presentation style CSS, and insert a link going to the next page to that document in each HTML document. Use the link element within the head element in order to accomplish this task. And so you can see here an example of it, and it says under title link relative style sheet, and then it gives the link for it, and that's how it finds it. The rel attribute, continuing reading, specifies the relationship between the HTML document and the link style sheet. Now, benefits of linked CSS. This separates design from content. You can link to a single CSS document from each of your HTML documents and get a consistent look through your website. So this is why a lot of big websites you look at all look the same, or at least throughout the whole website. If you make a change in a single CSS document, the change is instantly applied to all HTML documents that link to the style sheet. Also, these CSS documents are stored in browser memory cache when a user visits a site, and thus the site will load faster the next time the user visits, since it doesn't have to load the documents again. Now, there are downsides. When you are first learning have only one HTML document, it might seem like extra work to have 2 files to manage. But as soon as you have multiple HTML files, you'll see that's a much simpler approach. In fact, there aren't any downsides if you link your CSS documents correctly. So obviously this is the one we want. Now remember, this is the goal you're trying to achieve, separating content, HTML, I'm on the next page, from design. Alright, your challenge is to move CSS out of HTML. So, is to move all CSS rule sets in the document 0 to external CSS.html to their own CSS document, styles.css, and to move that document into its own folder, CSS. We're going to talk more through these steps. Finally, use the link element so that the styles.css document can apply your CSS rules to the 02 external css.html document. So basically we're going to be working on separating those two, if you didn't understand what I just said in all those different steps. So you can see figure 5.8, you're moving the CSS rules from the HTML document into their own CSS document. And to help you move along, here are the steps to take to make the move. And let's go through those. So step 5.2.1. Creating a document to contain the, going to the next page, CSS rules is really simple. Even simpler than creating an HTML document. How nice. A CSS document ends with the suffix .css and contains no HTML. You can give whatever name you want to the document, but a common name is styles.css. So, step 5.2.1. Create a folder for CSS. So, to help file your CSS documents separately from your HTML documents, it's a good idea to keep them in their own folder called CSS. Remember to keep it all lowercase. So let's go to the folder where it's actually saved. So Documents, FOWD, Chapter 5, and it says here I need to make a folder. I have one right here called CSS. So make sure you have that folder for your assignment. Now, why does CSS get its own folder? It's best to keep CSS documents in their own folder, as websites end up having multiple CSS documents. As you progress further along, you'll also find that other code languages like JavaScript often reside in their own folders. It's just an easy way to keep the languages you use organized. So it's like how you'd separate Spanish or French. You're doing the same thing with CSS and HTML. Now move your CSS rules from the head of the HTML document to a new styles.css style sheet document. Don't move any HTML with it, and don't leave any CSS behind. And basically move, cut and paste only your CSS rule sets to the styles.css document. So I'm going to go to Komodo Edit. I'm going to exit out of my browser preview, and I'm going to make a new file. And now this one, I'm going to save it right away. So I'm going to go over here, click here, Save As, and this one is going to be my CSS folder. So I go to Documents, FOWD, Chapter 5 folder. Wherever you have this saved, don't have it in the Downloads folder. It should be a folder with your name on it. Chapter 5 folder, CSS. And I'm going to name it what it just said, styles.css. I'm going to save it to this folder. And you'll notice it makes it different. Flash, or excuse me, not Flash, HTML has this picture where styles.css has this one. And it says I need to copy and paste your CSS rule sets to the styles.css document. So I'm going to do that. Basically just copy this right here, and I hold down Control on my keyboard, click up here again, and that's how I can select multiple things. And I'm going to go and cut it out and paste it into my document. Now you notice it rearranged my headers, my opening style tag. So I have to cut it again, press enter, move my insertion point up here, and paste it. So it should look like this after you've transferred it, and then I can get rid of, in this file, this text right here, because it no longer needs to be there. And then I can see right here styles.css is exactly how it's supposed to look, and then selector 1 is exactly how it should look too. And I'm going to save these quickly. Always make sure you're saving files as you go, so that way they don't get messed up. So why styles.css? Well, you can actually name CSS documents most anything you want, but try to keep the names meaningful to you and anyone else working on the project. So that's why you're naming it styles.css. A document name like styles could signify that the CSS document will contain the styles for any and all pages in your website. However, you could use a name like site or common if it's more appropriate. And then remember case sensitivity. Just like HTML documents and attribute values, CSS documents names are case sensitive. So usually you're going to want to keep it lowercase, so you can just type everything lowercase. A CSS document named styles.css is not the same as capital S styles.css. Also, all suffixes HTML and CSS, and folder name CSS should be lowercase, so make them all lowercase. And then the href attribute is used in the link element too. So the href attribute allows you to add a hypertext reference link, so that's what it's referring to an internal document, relative URL, or external document, absolute URL. So for instance, when we linked the flower picture to our HTML document, it was relative. It's based off of where it's located in the folder. If I want to link to a picture that's at a specific site, I put an absolute URL, is what it's talking about, URL. And then we're going to go to the next page, link to your CSS. In the final step, use the link element with the href attribute to attach the styles.css document in the CSS folder to 02 externals document. So that means I did the selector one, but I actually need to open up another file, and that's 02 external CSS document. So I'm opening that up, and you can see all the stuff right here. And what I need to do is go and include my link, and let's see here now, let's check and see where it wants us to include it. So in my folder, so I'm going to put it probably in the head part, so referring to it. So link relative style sheet. I'm just typing down what I'm seeing in the textbook. And you'll notice I refer to the folder CSS and then styles.css, and then I need to close the arrow. And I realized we didn't need to copy this part from selector 1 into our document. So go back to styles.css, cut it out, paste it back here in selector in the head section. I actually did it twice. Because styles, you're actually supposed to copy from external too. So I actually did the wrong thing there. Make sure you're paying attention to it because it's easy to mix it up. So I'm going to copy all the coding, as I said earlier, and like it says, don't copy style. So 02 externals .html document, and copy it to styles.css. I'm going to save styles.css with all the coding in there. Remember, do not include the style tags. And then it says now test out your result and see if 02 external CSS document uses the rules from it. And you can see the picture there with it. So I'm going to do the preview as soon as first let's save the file. Okay, very good. Click on my preview, of course in Firefox, or excuse me, in the browser here. And you'll notice it's not actually using the coding. And it looks like, because apparently I need to include it down here in the body. So let's try it again. And there we go. There it is. So sometimes it doesn't mention in the book, so you have to kind of play around with it. Which is what we did. So down here, after the div, closing div tag, I put my link reference and it changes it. So this is what you need to do with your file for it. So we checked it out. If you have any problems or want to check your answer, they provided a final result in the solutions folder and a video tutorial walkthrough on the website. So I just gave you a walkthrough on mine. And then import a CSS document. Now using the @import rule, we're almost done with the chapter, hang in there. Using the @import rule is similar to using the link option. This rule can be used within a CSS document to change or chain other CSS documents together. You could create one CSS document called layout.css for layout properties, covered in chapters 8, 9, and 10, and then another CSS document called type.css for typography rules. if you link to layout.css using the link, I moved on to the other page if you're wondering, by the way. You could add the import type.css rule and layout.css to import type.css into it, thereby saving the trouble of an additional link element to every document in the site to apply type.css. So you can import CSS from another page if you want. Now the benefits, we're going back to talk about different styles. Benefits import CSS, rather than adding a lot of link elements, which is what we just did to the HTML document, rules load through the CSS document. Downside, well, this is supported by all browsers. Old versions of Internet Explorer can be a bit buggy. Well, we don't have to worry about that too much because Internet Explorer isn't supported anymore. It's Microsoft Edge. Microsoft Edge isn't really that great when it comes to reading stuff, but now that you have a basic understanding of how you can use CSS rules to design your page, let's focus on some of the most common and basic selectors you'll need to know. So they have a video tutorial on there. I have this one for you that I want you to follow so that way things are emphasized. Selector types. So far in this chapter, we've only looked at element selectors, which select what to style, moving on to the next page, based on an element name. Well, in this section, we'll revisit them as well as look at some of the other common selector types that you'll use in your web design work. These include the following: universal selector, element selector, selector groupings, combinations, and class selectors. So we're going to talk about different type of selectors here further in the chapter. Alright, now a universal selector. You can select all elements in your website by using the universal selector, which takes the form of an asterisk. And so we're going to look at that a little bit more. So in the 03 selector universal.html document, so that means we need to open it up because we're referring to it. So I'm going to get rid of the preview, click the open folder, 03 selector universal. We're going to go through each one, and you can see add universal selector with the property of color and the value green. So we open it up. So in between the style tags, change all of the text color property from the default black to green value. And so I'm going to do that right here. And you can see, I'm going to just press backspace, and I have an asterisk left. And I'm going to put down the goofy looking line. So that's with shift, right next to the letter P. And I have to get rid of that extra one. For some reason it's adding it in there. Color, green, type it in just like the textbook shows it to us. And then save. And then I'm going to open it up in the browser, it says. So let's do a preview. Remember this for the selection. It makes it just go by faster. And then it's working on producing that preview. Right here, so you can see it's changed the color in the universal selector. So the color of the text is now green for all of the elements. So this one's convenient because you can select all of them at once. Alright, and then let's continue on to the next page. Now you can see at the top it says universally slow. Be careful when using the universal selector, as it's the least efficient of all selectors, causing your page load to slow down more than other selectors we'll be talking about. So this isn't maybe the best one when it comes to speed. Now the element selector. One of the most common selectors is the element selector, which selects all instances of an HTML element on the page or site. You want to change that header 1? You can do that. You need to style your paragraphs, the P elements. You can do that too. All you need to do is simply type the element name, and it gives a list of them without the less than and greater than symbols, so the brackets. So next thing we're doing is we're opening up 04 selector element. So I'm going to do that, 04 selector element. And then what I'm going to do is it says, and add the following CSS rule within the style tags in the head element. So you can see right here it says add rule to select paragraph below and change its color. So I'm going to put right here P, and then add the brackets. You'll notice I start typing in, add the second one, save it, and then let's do a preview, shall we? So, view, browser preview. And right there we can see for the paragraph element it's blue, just like matching the textbook. So that's the element selector where I select a specific element, so P. And then of course we looked at universal. And then selector grouping, that's on the next page. For an example of the next type of selector, open the file 05 selector grouping. So let's open that up. You know what, let's do this. Exit out here. And then open it up, it'll make it a little bit quicker. And 05 selector grouping. Now let's say you want the H1 and H2 elements to have a line under the text. You could select each HTML element separately and write the following properties and values, and it shows it like that. Or, however, if you had to do this for each of the text heading elements, H1 through 6, your CSS document could get pretty lengthy. And you'll come to find as you progress in your CSS skills that there are a lot of HTML elements that have similar repeating declaration blocks. Wouldn't it be better if you could group these similar rules? Well, you can. How exciting. CSS allows you to group selectors by using commas. So the H1 and H2 rules above can be rewritten in a single rule set. And the browser shows, and you can see it there, that both H1 and H2 are now underlined. So you can see that on the next page, and let's put that in the document. So you can see here it says group the H1 and H2 selectors so they each have a border bottom and it's 1 pixel solid black. And so in the style I type H1 comma H2 comma, put in the little curvy line text decoration underline. And press space. I'm going to save it, and then let's do a browser preview and take a look. And just like that, it looks just like the textbook. So you can see I have my header 1, header 2, and they're underlined just how I wanted it. Now there's also combinators, as it's called, instead of combinations. What if you want to select elements by their location or relationship to other elements? You can use certain symbols to help combine selectors and specify their relationships. And we'll delve into each of these combinators in more detail. There's a descendant selector, child selector, adjacent sibling selector, and general sibling selector. So we're flying through these. Open the example document 06 selectors combinators.html. So I'm going to exit out of this. I'm going to start exiting out of some of these files here. So save changes, yes. Save changes, yeah, let's exit out because we're just getting a lot of them opened up. Alright, so I'm going to open and select 06, selectors combinators. And it says, all this family tree terminology will make more sense as you work through some examples. So that's why we're looking at the examples. Now, family relationships. Think of the elements as relating to each other in terms of parents and children. You are a descendant of your parents and grandparents and have probably inherited some of their characteristics such as eye color or hair color. In a similar manner, related elements can share and inherit styles. In HTML code, when one element follows another element, they are called siblings. Specifically, the opening tag of the second element comes after the closing tag of the first, and they give an example. So H2 opening and closing tags are sibling of the H1 element, and the paragraph element is a sibling of the H2 element. Basically, it follows. Now, elements can also be inside of other elements. The elements contained within a parent element's tags are called children elements. And so you can see paragraph span, this text is within a span element, and other part is not. The span is a child of the paragraph element because it's in the paragraph element. If it wants to update, let's do that later. So you can see that in the textbook. You should never have the tags that overlap where one element opens within but closes outside of the other. That's not good. Elements that should either be siblings or child/parent, otherwise your HTML is faulty and it's going to mess it up. So it's important, if it opens within an element, it should close within an element. It should not open in one element and then close outside of that. Now, descendant selectors will apply a style rule to all elements that are descendants of a specified element. So let's take a look at step 5.6.1. In 06 selector combinators, notice that you have two lists. So let's take a look at our lists. We have unordered lists and ordered lists. Okay. Now, what if you wanted to select only the list items from the unordered list and change their color to blue? Well, we select our li element in your CSS rule, like so. So let's go to that. So up here, text decoration, and you can see I have descendant, selector, and so I'm going to type it in here in this line. So li color blue. And now I'm going to save it. And if I look at my preview, perfect, just like that, I have my new items there. So that's very good. So it worked out. But you want to select only the list items, so the step 5.6.2 in the unordered list. So add the ul element before li separated by a space. So I have this right here. I type ul in front of li, and it changes it. Now the rule focuses specifically on the li elements within the parent ul elements. You see that? So any li in ul elements. And so when I save it, you're going to see a difference. Now it's only the top part of the list, because down here it's only doing the li elements in the unordered list, not the ordered list. Now, moving on to child selectors are even more specific than descendant selectors. So we were looking at descendant, now we're looking at child. Performing a similar function, but selecting only the immediate children of a specified element. The child combinator uses the greater than sign between the two elements. So step 5.6.3, let's look at it. In the same file we've been working on, change the paragraphs P color property to green, but limit it to only those paragraphs contained within a div element. To do this, simply add a greater than sign between the div element and the P element. So I'm going to go up here to where it says child and selector, because that's what we're talking about right now. Type in div, like it's telling me, paragraph, add a little curvy line, color. Oh, I need to add my space. Come on now. Green, and my semicolon, and save it. Now you notice it even tells me, it shows up here, kind of the colors, that's pretty good. And you'll notice it's changed it right up here in it. So refresh your browser and see that the first two paragraphs not contained within the div element, and if you look at the coding down here below, it's this one, or excuse me, outside of it, are the ones that turn green. Now only the last two paragraphs, the children of the div element, should be green, and so that's correct. You can see it matches the textbook. Alright, looking at adjacent sibling selector. Now adjacent sibling selectors select the sibling element that immediately follows the element listed first. The adjacent sibling combinator uses the plus character. So basically the plus sign is what it's talking about. So step 5.6.4. Sticking with the example code in 06 selectors combinators, so we're already in there, create a new rule that selects only the paragraph immediately following the H1 element. And that talks about descendant versus child selectors. While descendant selectors will select elements inside other elements at any level of hierarchy, child selectors only select immediate children. So I'm going to look here, and you can see I need to type in the coding. And of course it shows up here. Adjacent sibling selector is where I type it in. And so I type in H1, and then I put the plus sign for the paragraph coding, so it knows it's the paragraph coding after the H1 heading that I want to make this change to. And then of course font size and 24 pixel, and then space, and I can save it, and we can see the change there. It changes over here the paragraph element after my header 1. So it did exactly what it was supposed to. Now, a general sibling selector. I know we're going through a lot of these at once. It's okay. Obviously, we have different ones. It'll take time for it to stick in your head, but we're going to go through them. The general sibling selector is a CSS3 rule, and we've been dealing with CSS2 thus far, at point 1 thus far. That matches elements that are siblings of a stated element. It uses the tilde character, which is that little goofy looking line over by 1 on my keyboard. It should be in the same place for yours. And unlike the adjacent sibling selector, it will select all siblings of the element. The elements don't have to be adjacent siblings, but they do need to have the same parent. And there are different versions of CSS. It talks about that. I'm not going to go through with you, but you can read that on your own. So step 565 on the next page. In 06 sibling combinators, we're already there, create a new rule that selects all paragraph elements that are siblings of the H1 element and sets the font family property to value aria. So already up here I can see the coding where it says general sibling selector. I don't have to get rid of this. I just click under it, type in heading 1, plus sign, not plus sign, the tilde. Right there. Oh, I had to hold down shift. There we go. So my computer's messing up. And then the goofy looking brackets, font family, Arial, just like that. And then I'm going to save it. And then you can see my preview. It's changed again. It changed the font family on all the paragraph ones under header 1. So sibling and parent connections. So going to the after the coding, this rule styles all paragraphs that are siblings to H1 to use the font Arial, but not the paragraphs that are siblings to the div element. And it kind of shows the connection there in the diagram of how the sibling works. So the H1 is the parent, and then the paragraph one is a sibling. Alright, now here's the result showing our first 2 paragraphs in Arial font, and of course the last 2 in the default Times font, which you see there in figure 519. Now class selectors, on to our next one. Class selectors begins with a period / full stop, so period symbol. This CSS rule will then apply wherever that class is designated in your HTML. So step 571. In 07 selectors class ID HTML document, so I gotta open that up. So I'm gonna exit out this one, exit out these 2 right here. First I'll open up this one before I do that. So 07 selectors class ID, and exit out of that. There we go. I'm gonna set up my browser preview right away. That way we can look at it as I am saving it. Remember the selection. Alright, you'll see 2 description lists, and we see them right there. You want to italicize the elements where the class attribute has the value of book. And so it shows me the list. Now all the book titles are now italicized. So I can see here in the coding image, it shows me the coding that's already there. And then so the CSS should have the following rule with a period preceding the selected class attribute. So up here at the top, I can see class, period, selected. This is where I'm going to type it in for a book exercise. So period, book, and then I'm going to press enter, tab, font style, italic. And then I can save my coding. And you'll see it changed it. Exactly what it's supposed to do. Any value for book, and so you can see these are class book, it changed that. ID selectors. By contrast, this is on the next page, an ID selector begins with the # symbol. Since ID attributes must have a unique value, the ID selector cannot match more than one element per HTML document. Well, step 572. Using the ID selector, you can target each author with an individual style. From the HTML element, select the ID attribute with the unique value of Steinbeck and turn the font color red. And so up here it shows my ID number or hash symbol, hashtag, and then selector. I'm going to put in hash symbol Steinbeck, put in the goofy line, press enter, tab, color, colon, red, semicolon, there you go, and then I'm going to save it. And you can see it changes my color just for that one author because of that ID that's down here. Now, you can see figure 5.21 has what's on my screen. General sibling support. As of this writing, the general sibling selector has pretty good support in all major browsers other than Internet Explorer 7 and below. Now, obviously, Internet Explorer doesn't exist anymore. They have Microsoft Edge, so you don't need to worry about it. Alright, moving on to the next page, Pseudo Classes. With Pseudo Classes, you can modify element properties based on user interaction. For example, have you ever seen a link on a website change color when you hover your cursor over the link and then you can see the picture? Sometimes the underline disappears from a link when you hover your cursor over it. So Pseudo Classes are similar to classes, which is what show the ID for us. They're similar to classes, but they're not explicitly present in HTML. They don't need to be added to your code. Basically, they are keywords in CSS that can be added to a selector to specify a special state of the element. In just a moment, we'll look at how you can achieve the hover effect using the pseudo class. Now, hover selector with the anchor element selector A. We're going to discuss the pseudo classes that style links in the various states. Unvisited, not yet clicked. Visited, of course, means you went to it. Hover is when you move your mouse over it, the cursor. And then, of course, active means the link was clicked, or it's being clicked. And then focus, the focus of the keyboard is on this link. Now, all pseudo classes, I'm on the next page, begin with a colon and appear immediately after the HTML element selection. No white space. And then you can see an example of it there. So, colon, link, pseudo class. In the example document, 08 selectors, P classes, and I'm going to open that up right now. Anyway, let's do this. Exit out my preview since I'm not going to be looking at that. 08, we're almost there. Good job hanging in there, we're going to make it. Alright, open there. And there are a number of links that point to some popular search engine websites, and we can see those links. So, step 581. Now, before moving on, click the link in the paragraph that will take you to Google's search engine page. So I'm going to open up the browser preview. And click on Google search page. When I click on it, you'll notice it changed color. It goes to it. And then if I click back, I can see the color has changed to purple from these two links. Alright. Now, often with a link, it'll be blue to indicate it. So when you're looking up stuff in Google, things like that, you'll see that. Now, after you visit the Google search page, click the back button like I did to return to your document, and you will see the first link in the paragraph and list below is now purple and underlined. You got that. In HTML, links use the anchor element, and you've seen that. href equals Google, basically, all that. Now, step 582. To change the color property of the hypertext links from the default value blue to orange, select the anchor element and the A element with the link Pseudo-Class to change the color. And so I can see in my textbook simple selector, and under it, so that's how I know where to put it, under it I click here and type in A, comma, A, link, and then space, color, orange, and space. And there we go. You can see it's changed all my links to that color. Alright, moving on to the next page. Here it talks about A and A link selectors. I'm going to move past that for the sake of time of the video. When you view the page again, you'll find all the links have changed from the default blue to orange. Great. So that's the normal link. Now if I want to change visited, as you can see here, visited Pseudo-Class, since the link to Google's search page has been clicked, perhaps it should change appearance to provide feedback telling the visitor that they've clicked the link. This type of feedback can be helpful when there's a list of links and a visitor wants to visually check off where they've been, which when you're doing research, this is definitely a helpful thing. So step 583, adding the visited Pseudo-Class to the A element will allow you to style the hyperlink when the link has already been clicked. So right down here it shows visited, and I'm gonna type it in here. So A visited color, oh I need to have the space, color red, and save. Alright, and then you can see my visited link is now actually styled red because I already clicked on it. So we know our code didn't work. And then moving on to the next page, hover Pseudo-Class. By adding the hover Pseudo-Class to the anchor element A, you give users immediate feedback when their cursor passes over the link, even briefly. So let's say you want to remove the underline from the text of the link when the user's cursor is over it. Well, the CSS property to call in is text decoration, and the value of none will remove the underline. So I'm going to type that in where it says hover, A, hover, weird line, text decoration, colon, none, and let's save it. And now when I hover over it, you can see the underline disappears. So it just adds a nice visual effect. Alright, and then they have the challenge here with the information you just learned, style the links in any state to appear without the underline. Style the links upon hover to show the underline. And then take a look at how my link works. And you can see he kind of changes his. Don't worry about that right now because obviously we want to keep moving with the book. If you have problems, I provide the solution for you, he says. Great. If you're following along with me, you shouldn't have any problems so far. And then to avoid the order, any problems of inherited styles, it's best to use the following order for pseudo classes. And so there's a specific order that he talks about. To remember the order, love, hate is what he uses. And you can look at that more on your own. Alright, now active pseudo class selector. We're getting there. The active pseudo class allows you to give feedback to the user when the element is activated. An example would be when you press a button on the mouse to click a link. So to add this rule, we're going to put it in. You simply add active pseudo class anchor A and modify the color property green. So I'm just going to use the coding in the textbook. Color green, just like that, and save. And that's when it's active. So when I click on the link, and you can see in the textbook it does that, and when I go to click on it here, you can see it turns green. Oh. Accidentally clicked and selected it, did it the wrong way there. Oh, that's not what I want. There we go. Alright, now that we got it fixed. Now, when you hover over the link and press the mouse button, make sure you keep it held down. You notice the link loses its underline. We already said that. And the color becomes green. While providing feedback for clicking something may seem like a small detail, it can help users see where they click, which is very true. This can be very beneficial You see with a lot of programs they do this, not necessarily with the link, but with different buttons. So focus on the order, it says in the textbook. Where does focus fit in the order of love-hate? Well, some say the hover and focus rules should be combined, so those using the keyboard get the same visual cues as those not using the keyboard. And then, of course, he lists more pseudos. So I've covered the most common pseudo-class selectors, but there are more, including pseudo-element selectors. Head over to the website and find out about, and he lists a bunch of them. Now we're going to look at the focus pseudo-class. Now, while the pseudo-classes we've used thus far are good, they leave out those visitors using a keyboard for navigation, and some people do, instead of a mouse. So the focus pseudo-class selects links that are current focus of the keyboard. So step 586, add the focus anchor, focus to your anchor or selector, and give the background color property a value of yellow. And so I'm going to do that right now. So a focus, and then background color yellow. There we go. And that shows the result is best seen in Chrome. Using the navigate through the web or keyboard to navigate through the website, click the tab key. And you notice I did that until it cycles to the link, and it does that right there. When the link becomes the focus of the keyboard, the browser will apply a yellow background. And I guess in Chrome, apparently, you might see a bluish border. Alright, wrapping things up, one of the best parts of a chapter. In this chapter, you started to harness the power of CSS using an assortment of selectors, pseudo classes, and pseudo elements. You also know how CSS can be added to your document, and that's best to keep content HTML and presentation separate. In the upcoming chapters, most of the CSS will be located in an external CSS document. In the next chapter, the journey continues with CSS selectors and their relationships with some commonly used HTML attributes that help provide additional information for HTML elements. And then, of course, there's bonus content to download if you want to test your skills with that. Otherwise, we're done with the chapter. So, great job getting through it here. I know it was a lot to learn, but we'll be using those different things, and that's the end of the video for quiz number 4, which is over chapter 5 in your textbook. So what you need to do now is take this folder. So I'm going to go to it here in mine. This chapter folder. You have all your stuff in it. What you need to do now, when you find it in File Explorer, that's what this is called, you right-click on it. Or excuse me, not right-click. You click Share tab up here. Click on the zip button, and it creates that extra folder. So you keep your assignment here, and then you create a zip file which you're going to submit to me, and you're going to name it FOWD dash, and then type down the quiz, so QZ, and the quiz number, which is 4, and then type down your first name and last name. And then press enter. So when you submit your file to me, it's going to look like this. And you'll notice I took chapter 5 folder, zipped it, and then did like that. So this is what you're going to email to me. So make sure you email the right thing. And then once you've done that using the file on Plus Portal, so you know what to type in the email, you have finished quiz number 5. Or excuse me, quiz number 4, chapter 5. Great job. Move on to the next assignment.